our lesson together today. It's great to spend a few minutes with you. I want you to start today by using your imagination a little bit. All right? I want you to think back on a time when you were sick, like really sick, like so sick. It wasn't good enough to just see your mom. You had to see the doctor. Now here's where the imagination comes in, okay? Imagine you needed to see the doctor, but you couldn't. Because the doctor would only, he spent all his time hanging out on the golf course with other doctors, right? Or like he couldn't see you because he had a new office policy that he only sees healthy people. Or imagine this, you've got a broken pipe in your house, right? Like every time you flush the toilet, it rains in the basement, right? You need a plumber, but the plumber won't come because the plumber only likes to look at perfectly good new pipes. Or imagine this, in your parents' car, every time you turn on the turn signal, the car shakes and wobbles. Well, you need a mechanic, right? But imagine this, you can't see the mechanic because he only looks at like really nice cars with nothing wrong with them. Or imagine this, you show up at school tomorrow and there's no teacher. You might be thinking, that's awesome, but it's not. Here's why. Turns out your teacher now only spends time with people who know everything already. What would that say? They're not there. Clearly you don't know everything, right? Imagine, you know what, never mind. You get the idea, right? If everybody only spent time with people who didn't need help, well, there'd be no one would ever get help again. If the people who could help only spent time with those who didn't need help, the people who needed help would never get help, right? Because mechanics fix cars, and plumbers fix pipes, and teachers pass on information, and doctors help sick people, and there's all that we need people who help us sometimes. But if they're not willing to do that, we're stuck. Well, you see, sometimes Jesus got in a lot of trouble because he hung out with what some people would call the wrong kind of people. Jesus hung out with people who needed help. Right? He saw himself as a helper. And so he would hang out with people who needed help, and those who didn't need help were like, hey, wait a minute, what's wrong? Jesus, you're spending time with the wrong kind of people. And he got in trouble with this a fair bit. And you see, back in Jesus' day, and actually still kind of today this happens even sometimes, people kind of get divided into two camps. There's the good people and the bad people. Right? And the good people were often the ones who sorted out who was in what camp. And they would look at other people that they didn't really like so much and go, oh, that's a bad person. And they'd kind of sit them over there and say, you shouldn't spend time with those bad people. And this is why Jesus got in trouble, not because he hung out with good people, because he hung out with the people that the good people called bad people. Confused yet? There's a story that Luke records in his gospel account of Jesus that kind of helps shed some light on this, right? Well, at a time in Jesus' life where he got in trouble for spending time with the bad people, right? Because they weren't necessarily bad people, they're just people who didn't follow all the rules. Sometimes there were people who didn't even know all the rules, but they got in trouble from the rule-following people because, well, they didn't do the right thing. And so Jesus was traveling through this town called Jericho. And in Jericho, like in pretty much every city of the day, there would be tax collectors. Now, tax collectors were especially hated people by their fellow Israelites, by their brothers and sisters. Why? Well, for a couple reasons. One, because they worked for the Roman government. Okay? They also, but which was seen as like kind of like being a traitor, right? It'd be like, imagine if the U.S. took over Canada and then anyone who got a job working for the American government, well, you could get an idea that it wouldn't go over very well. Or maybe it'd be a better point if Canada took over the U.S. and then anybody who was an American that started working for the Canadian government it wouldn't go well, right? That's kind of what was going on in Israel. If you collected taxes, you were working for the enemy people. And so tax collectors didn't have a great view, but also it's how they made their money. Because it's not just that they didn't get paid by Rome. No. They got paid because they charged too much in tax and they get to keep the difference. And so all the tax collectors, if they were really, really rich, that just means they charged way too much in taxes. And this was viewed by their brothers and sisters and fellow Israelites as, well, stealing. It was gouging. It was ripping off their friends and their family and their other fellow Israelite people. And so they had a really poor reputation and were quite strongly disliked. And so Jesus was in Jericho and he was passing along, and in Jericho lived a tax collector, right? A guy named Zacchaeus. Now, if you've heard of him before, the thing you probably most know about Zacchaeus is that, well, he was, let's see, how do we put this? Well, he wasn't a very tall man. We could say he was rather short. How short was he? Zacchaeus was so short, it turns out he was commonly overlooked. Zacchaeus was so short, he had to jump to catch a grounder. He was so short, he could limbo standing up. He was so short, well, you know what, this bit's done. Look, okay, here's the thing. To Zacchaeus, everybody was huge. He wanted to see Jesus, but when the crowd formed lining the street to get a look at Jesus, his view was blocked by just normal people. So what did he do? He's the thinker, that Zacchaeus. He ran down the street up ahead to where there was a tree. He climbed up, right? Climbed up in the tree so he could get a view of Jesus. But here's the thing. While his act was intended to help him get a better view of Jesus, what really happened was Jesus got a better view of Zacchaeus, because when he passed by, he called him out and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, let's hang out today at your house." That's a pretty loose translation. Anyways, so Jesus and Zacchaeus hung out. They got together for the afternoon and spent some time. And as we read in Luke, Zacchaeus' life was never the same. We don't know all of what Jesus said to Zacchaeus. We don't know exactly how long they hung out or everything that went down. But we know this. Zacchaeus was a different guy afterwards. He grew in generosity. He wanted to give back what he had stolen. He was in many ways a brand new person. Now, he didn't grow any taller, but his love for others grew incredibly. And he was entirely changed, not because he all of a sudden Jesus didn't tell him what the rules were. No, but he had an encounter with who Jesus was. He spent time with Jesus and was a different person afterwards. And I think that's really important for us to remember, because sometimes we think the rules are like the biggest deal around. They're like everything. And they're important, yes. But they will never be as important as actually meeting Jesus or of actually understanding the difference that Jesus makes in your life. And so, yes, rules are good, but Jesus is so much better. He's so much more important. When people are stuck and they're needing help and they're needing to figure life out, often what they need is not just to be told what the rules are. They don't need someone to come along and say, "Hey, boy, if you were keeping the rules, you'd be fixed." Because guess what? Zacchaeus was a living example of you can break the rules and things can be going okay for you. But when he met Jesus, things got so much better. People need Jesus, not just a whole bunch of rules. And why is that? Well, it's like our verse of the month tells us, right? In John 14, verse 5, where Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus came walking through Jericho that day and essentially was the embodiment of the way to God. And Zacchaeus caught hold of it and he decided to follow along. So friends, as you go about your week this week, going to school or work or wherever you happen to be, hanging out with friends even, my excitement about that, about all of this life of following Jesus, is that when we spend time with others, we have the opportunity to help them understand what it's like to spend time with Jesus. And so that's my challenge for you guys this week, to go out and help others learn about Jesus by how you live like him, so that they can find help for all of their needs of life. Blessings on you this week.